Gnomeregan in a nutshell. Grubbis. Speak to Blastmaster Emmy Shortfuse to begin the encounter. Before the boss, waves of trogs will engage the raid from both caves progressively. During the wave phase, gas cloud will spawn, which can damage the players but can also kill the adds. Whenever gas cloud spawns, tank should drag existing adds into the cloud to dispose both adds and cloud. Once Grubbis spawns, main tank should hold Grubbis while off tank should hold Chomper. All DPS should focus on Grubbis until he goes down. During the fight, main tank should position Grubbis away from any spawning gas clouds. Off tank should pull Chomper and any spawning adds into gas clouds to get rid of them. After Grubbis goes down, remember to also kill Chomper before focusing on loot. Viscous Fallout. This fight tends to require a bit of moving around, so make sure you prep by avoiding the boss while clearing the room. Only one tank is required for this fight. Tank's only responsibility here is to kite boss after each sludge spawn, which is a pool of toxic slime dealing AoE damage. Boss will regularly cast irradiated goo, which will summon 3 add slimes. Raid have around 10 seconds to dispose of them before they reach chains on the ground and transform into an elemental. On transformation, those elementals will spawn raid-wide AoE that deals heavy damage. On add spawn, every DPS should switch to them and rotate between them until all adds are dead. Should anyone receive a stack of radiation burn, it need to be healed fast and purified or cleansed. Nature protection potion make this fight significantly easier. Crowd Pummeler 960. This fight again only need one tank, but due to one-shot mechanic, it's good to have off-tank ready to take over. During the fight, boss will often cast Gnomeregan Smash. During the cast, boss upper body will rotate 90 degrees to either side, while upon completed cast, he will shoot a projectile that will push any player facing front of the boss off the platform to their death. Looking at the boss's feet, we can determine where he's facing and move to his side. Front and back are easily confused mid-fight, and being on the boss's side is always the safe option. Another ability to watch out for is gear toss. Several times through the fight, the boss will throw spinning gear on the floor that upon impact push player back and deal damage. You have to be careful to avoid those, as you can be chained between several gears and knocked off the platform. At 30%, boss will start using the claw. He'll target random player, dash to him, grab him for few seconds while still attacking the raid. Healers have to focus on that player and keep him alive through the initial damage and duration of the hold. Electrocutioner 6000.
Electric Justice!
As previously, clear the room of adds while avoiding the boss before the pull. For this fight, we will again only need one tank. Select 2 3-person groups, with 1 person in each group being marked for stacking on them. Once pulled, we'll have to deal with 3 abilities. Magnetic pulls. Affected player will constantly pull every friendly target within 8 yards to himself, dealing damage to them. Raid member affected by it should move away from the raid for minimal safety distance, around 10 yards. Discombobulation protocol, an AoE spell that deals AoE damage and knocks the entire raid back. Static arc, chain lightning that hits the furthest player and spreads to 2 closest targets to the player. Static arc also applies debuff to all hit targets that causes the next static arc to deal 500% more damage for 20 seconds. This fight have 2 easy tactics depending on your group composition. Tactic 1, ranged group. If you have 6 ranged players, divide them into groups of 3 and set them to stack nearly max range on the left and right side of the boss. Have 1 player from each group ready to take few steps back to be targeted by chain lightning. Whenever one group receives chain lightning, have their player step back to the stack and group from another side step back. Keep the rotation until boss is down. Have 1 extra player ready to rush to either of stacks and help them cover for one of them should any of the stack members be targeted by magnetic pulls. Meanwhile, any player targeted by magnetic pulls should move behind the melee group and in between the ranged group, making sure he's not further from the boss than any of the stacked groups. Tactic number 2, melee group. Create 2 groups of 3 players from 2 healers and as many melee as you need. Have the first group stay far in the back until they receive static arc, then the second group disengage the boss and swap with the first group until they receive static arc. Keep the rotation until boss is down. As with ranged group, have 1 extra player ready to rush into stacking groups and help them cover for any member targeted by magnetic pulls. Meanwhile, any player targeted by magnetic pulls should move to either left or right side of the boss on the closest possible range so that they don't move further than rotating groups. The Mechanical Menagerie. This fight consists of 4 mini-bosses and require 2 tanks. STX-37CN Chicken, STX-25NB Squirrel, STX-13LL Sheep, STX-04BD Whelp. Main tank should hold Chicken and Squirrel, while off tank holds the Whelp. Sheep deals AoE damage and stuns any melee attacker on each attack, so should be kited by the entire raid and nuked down by ranged DPS. Chicken, Squirrel and Whelp should be kept close by so that any AoE damage bounces between them. During the encounter, Chicken will spawn egg mine that have to be nuked down as priority within seconds. Whelp will breathe fire toward a random player that all players have to move out of. Squirrel will deal AoE damage that have to be healed quickly and throw shield, reducing damage taken by bosses in it, so tanks have to move the bosses out of it. Periodically, Sheep will activate Thorn Shield that will deal damage to anyone attacking it, during which range should help with other 3 bosses. All 4 bosses have to be killed simultaneously, as if any of them goes down while at least one of them is alive, downed boss will repair itself within few seconds and return to the fight. If you have low range damage output, don't be afraid to stop the fight when melee bosses are around 5 to 3% health so that sheep damage can catch up. If anyone drops low on mana, they can press the red button on the pillars surrounding the area, trading chunk of the health for mana. Mekgineer Thermaplugg.
Usurpers! Gnomeregan is mine!
This boss consists of 4 phases and require 2 tanks. Before we go into phases, let's explain the mechanics that have to be rotated through the entire fight. Select 2 healers and 1 ranged DPS for the bombs rotation. Ideally, select 1 more person that can deal ranged damage to help with the bombs. During the entire fight, every few seconds, boss will activate 1 random pillar surrounding the area, causing it to constantly drop bombs matching its current phase. Bombs explode on contact with any player, causing damage and dropping matching debuff. Selected players have to press the red button, which will cause them to receive a short stun and replenish mana, while also deactivating the pillar. Bombs have very low health and have to be targeted by ranged DPS to avoid the explosion. Upon deactivating the pillar, player will receive a 30-second debuff, preventing them from pressing another button again, which is why we need rotating group. Make sure to have the entire raid look out for the rotating group. In case if pillar is outside of group's range, select someone to run up toward it and deactivate it. Boss will change phases at 50% health, each time healing itself back to full health. Phase 1, Fire. Incendiary bombs will spawn from the pillars. Upon explosion, they deal high damage and leave fire on the ground that continuously deal damage and applies Sprocket Fire stack. Boss will use Sprocket Fire Punch that causes stacking damage dealing debuff and use Furnace Surge, a flamethrower-like ability that causes any player facing it to receive a multiple stacks over duration. Only 1 tank should face the boss during the Furnace Surge and should kite the boss to reduce damage and stacks taken. Tanks should swap every 5 to 7 stacks of Sprocket Fire. Phase 2, Frost. Frost bombs will spawn from pillars. Upon explosion, they deal high damage and leave patch of frost on the ground that slows and apply freezing stack. Boss will cast Super Cool Smash that apply freezing stack to its target, and Coolant Discharge, which is a raid-wide AoE that also applies freezing stack to the entire raid. Upon 10 stacks of freezing, player become frozen solid. Tanks should swap at around 8 stacks. Free action potion can be used for that phase to prevent any stacks. Phase 3. Poison. Radioactive bombs will spawn from the pillars. Upon explosion, they deal high damage and leave cloud of poison on the ground that applies radiation sickness, which increase nature damage taken by 50%. Boss will use Hazardous Hammer, which apply radiation sickness to current player. Toxic Ventilation is a nature damage raid-wide AoE that has to be interrupted. Nature Protection Potion can be used to ease this phase. Phase 4. Combined. Phase 4 is the last phase. Pillars will now activate randomly 1 of 3 sets of bombs from previous phases. Boss will now utilize all abilities from previous phases and all tactics have to be combined for this phase. Simply keep on rotating bombs, make sure tanks swap whenever they reach Sprocket Fire or freezing stacks, kite Furnace Surge, and interrupt toxic ventilation. Once you bring the boss down, don't stop yet and make sure you actually defeat the boss gnome, which will now get out of his mech unit and fight you himself. He doesn't possess any abilities and have very low health, so it's similar to disposing Chomper after fight with Grubbis. To make this fight significantly easier, I'd suggest to have the entire raid drink nature protection potion before the pull, then use free action potion in phase 2 after the first bomb spawn. Lastly, use another nature protection potion once the first one is depleted in phase 3. Also remember that while running to deactivate the bombs, you shouldn't run directly under the pillar, as bomb can drop directly on you, causing it to instantly explode and kill you.